All right, welcome back, listeners. This is another episode of Go Be Wyoming. I'm your host, Aaron Gray, and today we have another special guest, Cyrus Western, State House District 51 representative. Cyrus, thanks for joining me today.
I'm glad to be on the show.
Thank you. Well, let's just jump into it. You just had a re-election for your second term.
I did.
You won the primary. What is kind of your favorite thing about campaigning? You know, as a representative, this is two terms in a row, but what's
Sure.
kind of a fun thing you like doing about campaigning?
Sure. I mean, it's campaigning is kind of one of those love-hate things that there are moments where you're just like, oh gosh, will this ever end? And then there are moments where actually it's really fun and you really enjoy it. I would say that it's engaging with people because in hearing what they're thinking, what are their thoughts on issues, and just learning about them. Because I was moved to Sheridan when I was a year old and raised here, all that stuff. But when you campaign, especially when you're out door knocking and you're out in these communities, you realize there are people here that you never would have seen otherwise or interact with otherwise unless
Mhm.
you went to them, right? And so I think engaging with them and hearing what their concerns are and really talking with them, that's the most interesting and best part about it, I think, because you go through all this stuff and you're in session or you're in committee meetings and this can definitely be interesting and rewarding, but I think it's really interesting actually talking to folks, hearing what they have to say, what are their concerns, and what do they want you to know about them. Learning that
Right.
kind of stuff is stuff I enjoy the most, at least when it comes to campaigning. So
Perfect. Cool. Um, and then, yeah, how was this campaign different from your first one? You came out, I think at the time you were going to challenge Bo Beitman. He was the representative, but then he kind of switched over to the Senate side. So that was a little
correct.
interesting first race. But how was this campaign a little different? You were kind of defending your seat this go round.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, I think my strategy, I think generally is the best strategy campaigning is to run on you and what you bring to the table. What
Mm-hmm.
ideas do you have? What solutions do you have? How do you want to help solve problems and deliver results, right? And so that's kind of what I ran on and about the things that I accomplished these last 2 years and got done on behalf of the district that are beneficial for the district. So those were kind of the big things. But um, it is, again, it was my first time running for office and not being the outs, kind of being the newcomer, where I was running as the incumbent. This is my first time doing that, so it was a little bit different because people, like, they know who you are, and they're a little bit more familiar with you than you were 2 years ago. When so that was kind of the major difference, but it really wasn't too bad. People were still great to interact with, so it was a good experience.
Cool, cool. And how was your first term? That was your freshman representative. Kind of give us maybe what was a surprise to you, and then, or maybe what kind of you were like, this was what I was expecting.
Sure. I mean, I worked on Capitol Hill as a staffer, so I kind of cut my teeth there, and I had been to interact with the legislature multiple times for a while prior to.
Uh-huh.
So I had enough interaction to have a rough idea. There was never any moments where I was like totally surprised or totally caught off guard. Um, but all in all, I think it went really well. It's like anything in life. To be good at it, it's a lot of work.
Yep.
I mean, you'd be surprised at the amount of people who, let's put it this way, are not prepared,
Yep.
who don't do their homework. And I think whether it's in elected office, whether you're a high school football coach,
Mm-hmm.
uh, whether it's whatever it is, an attorney, a doctor, the more prepared you are, the better off you're going to be. And that's no different in the legislature. And that was just another, this past my freshman term kind of reaffirmed that thing that I've known for a long time. And so that was a great experience. And really just being there and legislating, honestly, being with your fellow legislators was one of the more rewarding things, and actually getting stuff done. Everyone likes to gripe about something, what you name it, from the
Sure.
big stuff to healthcare to taxes to well, the county doesn't plow my road quickly enough in the morning. Everyone loves to gripe, and so to actually be part of a body that can actually do something, granted slowly and not as quickly as we all like, but still being part of the body that gets to fix issues, that I really enjoyed. It was there's frustrating moments for sure, but on the whole, it was a super rewarding experience. So yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. No, and that's You know, one of the reasons I wanted to start this show is first the accessibility to representatives like you and senators, and to get
Yeah, of
that
course.
message of you know, we still get things done. You know,
Yeah, for sure.
we're in a great state, and we've got a great governing body.
Absolutely.
And you know, let's kind of roll into that. You know, we have an interesting legislative session this year. You know, it's not a secret with COVID, and
Across.
then how fossil fuels and stuff have impacted the state.
Right.
You know, that's everyone's talking about is budget, budget, budget. Um,
Yep.
you know, what are kind of some other things, you know, outside of the budget that you see, you know, coming up this legislative session?
You know, I mean, that is certainly the main thing that comes up, and that's what everyone's attention is on. But I think that there's always room for improvement. I mean, in areas of criminal justice reform, that's something that I've been paying attention to. I mean, I'm involved in numerous efforts to try to get some stuff for the hunting public done, and for wildlife conservation, stuff like that. That is not necessarily budget related. I mean,
Yep.
everything is budget related because everything requires money, right? But that
Mhm.
we can add or make adjustments to state statute that don't really require money per se, but can still have an impact on bettering people's lives. So
Sure.
those are at least a couple things that I'm involved in that aren't necessarily budgetarily related, that are still really interesting, and I think that will have a positive impact.
Cool. Well, and
So,
I think that's great to hear, you know, that there's some potential justice reform that you said, and then conservation. Obviously, you're big into that, and
yep,
um, you know, I do want to ask you just your thoughts. You know, this isn't a got you question here, but you
sure.
know, how do you think the state of Wyoming has done with the relief package for COVID? Um, you know, is there, you may have an inside scoop of, is there more that
Sure.
we're going to do?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I certainly hope that. I think that a little bit of a mixed bag. I think we're not getting it out to the general public quickly, but I think that the programs that we set out, the three mitigation funds, I think that we set
Mhm.
up are doing well. They're getting that money in the right hands. I think the first step was to get that money in the hands of small businesses, because
Right.
those are the people who, through no fault of their own, were doing their best, running their businesses to the best of their abilities, and got blindsided. So I think that's priority number one, and we've done a lot of that. You know, there was uh, a particular constituent who owns a lodge up on top of the mountain, you know, a hotel and restaurant. They were in pretty tough shape, and they were able to get some relief through the CARES money that the state got. So there's a great example of where that money went to where it was supposed to and had the impact that it was intended.
Right.
Um, so I think it's not getting out quick enough, but I think we're definitely doing our best to get it in the right places, and I think we have. And I encourage the governor to continue to use the money judiciously, but also don't be afraid to authorize a release of more of those funds, especially in the event that it goes to our small businesses
Hmm.
across the state. So, and
Yeah.
you can it's all public and transparent. You can see who got money and how much they got. And I think a lot, if you look, a lot of those recipients are overwhelmingly in the hospitality industry, people who own restaurants, people who own hotels, you know, gift shops, stuff like that. Those are
Yep.
all, again, our small businesses that are really reliant on tourism that got hit pretty hard. So I think that's an example of the money went to where it was supposed to.
Right. And I think, you know, like you said, everyone's going to have a, you know, a gripe. And obviously the first thing with all this relief stuff is it wasn't fast enough. And I think that that's always going to be everyone's
Sure.
first thing.
Sure.
So, yeah. And I was doing some research, you know, you're totally right. It's very transparent from the state, you know, where the funds went, how much it was.
Yep. Yep.
So,
I think
um,
that's a good thing, because I think, you know, these are obviously unprecedented times and we have to think outside the box, but I also think we can't abandon transparency, because I think transparency is one of the main tools, if not the number one tool, in accountability.
mhm.
Um, and holding ourselves accountable and holding others accountable. I think making sure people know, saying, hey, this is going to be open and public information. I think it helps keep everyone. It's the old, Benjamin Franklin quote: "A law keeps an honest man out." And I
Mhm.
think transparency is that lock in this situation.
Yeah. Perfect. No, well said. Um, Well, let's get into, we kind of already hit on it, kind of hunting conservation.
Sure.
I imagine you're participating tomorrow. You want to give the
Absolutely.
secrets away, what area you're in, or
I'll be hunting in the state of Wyoming. How does that sound?
that sounds good.
Yeah.
And that's archery, correct? Archery starts first.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Very few areas you're allowed to rifle hunt in September. There's a couple for elk and for deer, but almost all of
Mhm.
them are September is strictly archery. So,
Yep.
which I think is
And,
very good.
and have you seen, and I don't know if you don't, this is kind of off the cuff here. Have you seen
Sure.
any numbers on out of state hunters? What that looks like for the state? Because that is a pretty good, revenue generating, for the
Yeah.
state.
No. I mean, there's uh, non-resident. I mean, if you just look at the price tag disparity, I mean, I think a bull tag over the counter for a resident, it's right around $60, and for the non-resident special, it's like 1,100 or 1,200 bucks, and just the
Mhm.
non-resident regular, I think, is still like $800. I mean, it's expensive. So I think that accounts for about half of the revenue, of all the revenue generated from the sale of tags.
Yep.
It's non-resident, so they contribute a lot. And there's a big movement right now. Not a big movement. There's some. I think it's small, but vocal movement to change the tag allocation to 90-10.
Hmm.
And I, I think in a perfect world that would be great, because there are other states, like I believe Utah and Idaho are 90-10 allocation. 10% of their tags go to non-residents, 90% go to residents. We're not too far off. I think it's right around like 80-20 or somewhere around
Okay.
there, just depending on the species and this given area for that
Yep.
species. But my thought is this: is Game and Fish is an agency that's basically off the general fund. They're self-sustaining through
Yep.
fees, all that other kind of stuff. Um, Game and Fish works pretty hard to keep the fees low for residents. If they're going to be losing a bunch of revenue, um, where's that makeup going to come from? I mean, one of the main ways is fees for residents, right? You don't want to pay higher tag fees. I don't want to pay higher tag fees. So I think we have to really think about what are we willing to sacrifice to get this more favorable allocation. And look, in some elk and deer areas, it may mean hundreds more tags for that given area, potentially, but
Yep.
not for a lot. The majority is only an incremental increase of only a couple percentage points in terms of allocation for residents, in terms of the number of additional available licenses versus the ones they already make available to residents.
Right.
Uh, to those folks who are hell bent on the 90-10 kind of idea, is it worth considering? Sure. I think the other things that we are facing in this state, issues in terms of hunting, in terms of wildlife management, are much more pressing and important. I mean, 30 years ago, there were about 500,000 mule deer in the state of Wyoming. Today, there's about 300,000. I see that as a hugely important issue that is much more worthy of our limited time and certainly our limited money
Yep.
and trying to address some of those issues. So those are the kind of things that I would rather focus my time and department time on in terms of wildlife and conservation. So that's
Right.
always one I should have been following.
Yeah. Well, and that's and I was talking with some guys this morning about conservation and what that means. And I think you said that very eloquently about, like, hey, look, like, we can have a conversation about 90-10, but like you brought up the mule deer population, that's a little more pressing than giving that
Sure.
extra 10% to residents. Like, hey, yeah, that'd be awesome, but if there's no mule deer to hunt, then there's a that's
What's
a
the
bigger
point in having
concern.
more tags if you don't have healthy herds and healthy populations?
Right. Totally.
Oh,
Um, let's talk. This is kind of a question I had too. Is
sure.
um, as an oil and gas landman, and I believe you're in oil and gas too. There's kind of this.
Correct.
Um,
It's been a tough summer. I'll tell you that much.
yes. Yeah. um, but we run into this situation. Same with hunting. Um, you know, um, the corner hopping, and
Right.
hopefully I'm not stepping on a landmine here, but it
No,
is an interesting discussion to have about private land ownership and, how
absolutely.
do people access state land, and,
Yep. Yep. And
is there push for stuff like that, legislation for that?
and that's actually, in addition to conservation, that's probably the number one issue that I've been talking about and trying to figure out a way to move the needle is access.
Mm,
Because I think if you look at all the hunters, at least in the American West, 97% of them either wholly or partially rely on public land for a successful harvest. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about the importance of public land and its use. And the reality is there are some parts of the American West and here in Wyoming and here in this county where access is tough. If you look at the entire state, the toughest access issues in the entire state of Wyoming are in Sheridan, Johnson, and Campbell counties, and Converse as well, and some of the other ones. But it's that northeast quarter of the state where access is hardest, where you got to hike, you got to drive further, you got to hike more to get into the good quality habitat to find high quality game. And that's one of the things I've been working on. And look, personally, I'm all for corner hopping. I would love to, and I've actually talked with Game and Fish, and I've talked with Office of State Lands, OSLI, about a bill about corner hopping. Politically, that's a pretty big lift. There'll be some opposition from landowners, and I understand their position, and it makes sense.
Yep.
There's also a lot of technical, political aspects aside. There's a lot of technical stuff if we were going to get that bill right. For example, a lot of those corners aren't USGS surveyed. They haven't had, a bunch of, engineers or people with their PLS out there actually surveying these corners to know exactly where they are. Because the hunting argument is, well, if I just take one giant step from one corner to the other, I can go from state land or public land, whether it's BLM or Forest Service or whatever. I can go from public land to public land without treading a foot on private. For that to be accurate, for that to happen in the most literal sense, there has to be a perfectly surveyed corner. And if you look at, Onyx Hunt app is the one I use. I know there's a couple of those apps out, but that's the one I use. And all of them are pretty accurate, but I think it's within like 2 or 3 yards, which is not accurate enough to say with complete certainty I step from public to public.
Yep.
So I mean, that's one of the aspects is, what are we going to do? We'd have to allocate a lot of money to either have state engineers or engineers from USGS or contract, a land surveyor or engineers, a third party to come into it to survey the thousands, it'd be probably tens of thousands of corners that exist across the state of Wyoming. So that's one technical thing that we have to think about in a bill like that. So that's one of my long-term things I want to get done.
For sure.
In the meantime, one of the solutions is trying to figure out another way around that, because the whole idea is better access for hunters, right? And so we've got mechanisms like, for example, the HMA system, the hunter management area. The mechanism works well to increase access. It's a funding thing, right? That's one of the biggest things is that, look, if I'm a rancher and someone comes to me and says, well, what's it going to take to allow the hunters to cross your private to get on public that you have control over, the vast majority of time, it comes down to dollars and cents, right? If the check is big enough, they're going to give it with all due consideration, right? So that's one of the things I'm working on is how can we, and, I know, again, you're kind of on the never tax kind of bandwagon. And I agree. However, one of the things we are thinking about doing is if I believe, and a lot of hunters I've talked to, is that they would be willing to pay more, say in a conservation stand, if they know that money is actually going to unlocking high quality land. We're not talking some some subpar tract way out in the middle of nowhere that there isn't any good animals on it anyway. Like actually going to unlocking really high quality habitat that's got good quality game on it. A lot of hunters I've talked to say, yeah, I'm willing to pay an additional, $5, $6, $7, whatever it is, something like that.
Yep.
To unlock that land. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about is trying to figure out how can we increase access and making sure that hunters are getting bang for the buck in the event that they're willing to pay an extra 5% or whatever it is. So that's access is one of the biggest things, because I, like the vast majority of hunters, am relegated to hunting on public land. First antelope I ever harvested on BLM. The first elk I ever shot with my bow up on National Forest Service. I have mistered ranchers and able to get last minute access, but hardly a reliable game plan for hunting. So that's access is a big thing for me that I think about a lot.
Well, and I think those solutions you just talked about, one, there is funding. There's no way kind of around it, and I think one thing you hit on, that makes me feel good is, transparency. As long as we know where that's going,
100%.
not a big deal to me. Like you said, if it's going to an area that's not great, then yeah, there's a problem. But
Right, exactly. And that's was the overwhelming majority. The folks I've talked to, at least around Sheridan, it's not like I've conducted a
yeah,
statistically sound survey of all
yeah,
100 states there. They'd be willing to pay more if they know it's going to access key areas, whether it's up in the in the Bighorns or way out in the Powder River Breaks where it's access is really tough and it's very disjointed, or stuff like that.
yep,
Because I think that's access is so important, because hunting is such a phenomenal legacy, right? And for that
mhm,
legacy to continue, at least in this state, and I think in America, there has to be good access to public. I mean,
yeah,
and that's what I love about hunting, is that if you go over to Europe, hunting is considered a very blue blood royal sport, because the people who own the land for the last 1,000 years in Europe were the landed gentry, the nobility, the aristocrats. Where in America, hunting is considered it's a activity that's engaged in by across the socioeconomic spectrum, rich, poor, and everything in between. People love to hunt, in
mhm,
part because we have all this public land where you can do it. So
right, yeah,
yeah,
totally. And one thing too, for anyone out there too, the technical aspect of the, get the outside of hiring the, the contractors or whoever to survey the corners. There's also the question of, okay, well, who's going to pay for to redo fences? That's
exactly. Yeah, I mean that's a really tough one, because look, we have to work with landowners, with ranchers. I know every hunter has the story of the cranky rancher that was yelling at them because they thought they were on their land, but turns out it was public or whatever. But the
Yep.
reality is that ranchers and landowners have to have a seat at the table. And quite frankly, a lot of land, not all, but a lot of them have done a pretty good job at actually engaging in herd management and habitat management. Like, for example, in the Powder River Breaks, I would argue have some of the biggest mule deer in the state. And in large part, it's because a lot of that is private, and these ranchers have done a good job of managing these herds and only harvesting mature bucks and letting successful recruitment of these younger ones. And that's why you see some really high quality deer out there. So I think respecting private property and working with landowners
Yep.
is an absolute must in this
Mhm.
whole conversation.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Um, well, Cyrus, that's kind of all I had. That, like I said, we kept this nice and short. I will give you a little kind of the floor here.
Sure.
One year primary, but still a lot of work to still be done, and
Sure. Yep.
second term. But what's kind of just a quick message to your constituents and the people of Wyoming about this upcoming legislative session?
I think this is the question that we have to ask ourselves constantly, but especially now, is what do we want our community to look like? And I'm not talking next budget cycle or the budget cycle after that. I'm talking 20 years from now. What do we want Sheridan to look like? Because if you look at Sheridan 30, 40 years ago, the big employers were, it was the sugar mill, it was the flour mill, it was all the dairy farms that we had here, and they're all gone and they're not coming back, right? So we have to constantly be asking ourselves, how do we adapt to put ourselves in a position where we're not just surviving, but we're thriving? And I think Sheridan on the whole is doing a pretty dang good job, right? We've got, there's a lot of oil and gas engineers in Sheridan, and we've got lots of mining in Sheridan, but we've also got, VacuTech, Weatherby, Keenan Designs, EMAN, all those L&H, all those guys, then that light manufacturing sector that I think are working in replacing those good, solid blue collar jobs that I think any successful community, any thriving community has to have. So I asked people, what do we want our communities to look like? And what are we willing to give up to ensure that happens? What sacrifices are we willing to make, and what sacrifices are too much? Like right now we're going through these budget cuts, which I think cutting is the absolutely necessary first step. Because the reality is this, if I have a job, let's say I'm a really successful attorney and I'm making whatever, 300 grand a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life is great. I've got a nice house. I've got a nice car. I've got all those really nice things, right? And let's say for whatever reason, I lose my job and I have to take an attorney in a smaller office, whatever it is, and I'm only making 100 grand a year. That's a $200,000 a year decrease in income. That's kind of what we're going through here in the state of Wyoming, right? We have to really figure out, now that I have the smaller salary, the smaller income, what are the things that I'm willing to let go of? What are the things that I'm spending on? And some of these things are generally speaking, worthy expenditures. our coaching staff at our high schools. I think I would want my kid to be able to play sports, and to play sports, they need a good coaching staff, right?
Yep.
What are the things we're willing to let go of to prioritize our money?
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of people love to talk about, all the waste, all the fraud, all that stuff. And I'm not saying there isn't excessive or unnecessary spending that's gone on, because there absolutely has.
Yep.
But I think people need to realize that with these cuts, we're cutting people, we're cutting jobs. And these aren't nameless, faceless bureaucrats in some distant land. These are our neighbors. These are our friends. These are our family. I mean, how many people do you know that work in education? I guarantee you, one of my best friends, his wife's a teacher out in Tongue River.
Yep.
So I don't look at this as like, I'm going to walk around bragging about all the cuts we made and look at all this stuff. Like, no, like, we're doing this because we have no choice. And I understand that these cuts are going to have a really painful impact. I'm going in clear out. I think there are not a lot, but there are definitely some people who are thinking, well, it's just cut them. It's not a big deal. Where it's like, I have to look these people in the eye and justify my decision. And that's my question is, what can I do? And what kind of community do we want to have? And what are we willing to give up to get there? What services are we willing to sacrifice? And what are the ones that we're willing to pay more of out of our own pockets to ensure are delivered at a quality level?
Yep.
So
totally.
there's my rant.
No, well, and that's, and I think, I think everyone's on board. Everyone understands, look, that it's going to be tough. People are going to lose jobs. The private sector's already lost jobs. People have been struggling, and I mean, it's the state government's not immune to it. And I think you did say it well, that, in your position, like you said, you have to kind of look those people in the eye and say, hey, this is where we're at. Like this, I mean,
yep.
And like you said, I'm not boasting about it, which is, that'd be probably the wrong thing to do. But well, no, that was perfect, and that was well said. And good luck tomorrow on opening day.
What about yourself? Are you a bow hunter yourself, or what's your story?
Nope. I've never gotten to bow hunting. I've done rifle hunting.
Sure.
As a football coach, it is really freaking hard to get out there. A friend of mine was like, when do you guys practice? And I was like, 4. And he's like, yeah, that's rough. He was like, that's kind of the golden time to go in the afternoon. I could go in the mornings, I guess, but I've done rifle hunting. That's awesome. I love rifle hunting. That's I need to.
Man. Hunting period is, I mean, I'm obviously, kind of a snob when it comes to bow hunting, but no, hunting across the board is an incredibly rewarding experience. So for sure. Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah.
How are the Broncs looking this season?
Good. They won their first game against Laramie here at home. And it looks like we're going to have a season. Looks like, I don't see us delaying or anything. Looks like everything's going well so far with the school districts. And, but Broncs look good.
Good.
The 4A is going to be tough this year. I think there's everyone's back, and so that'll be fun. And I think 2A, those Tongue River and Bighorn will start this week, I believe. Both Sheridan County's had a great run here, recently football wise with all 3 schools.
Let's keep it up. Or we got a good coaching staff.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. See, so, but yeah. Well, Cyrus, thanks for joining again. Hopefully we can do another interview. One thing I'd love to do is catch you guys maybe in session and talk about maybe bills or stuff, and just keep everyone informed. So
yeah, for sure, man. Anytime.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, guys. This was State House District Representative 51, Cyrus Western. Thanks, Cyrus.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on the show.